Okay, and we are back. This is the bonus video, if you so chose to dive into some of the details surrounding JFK's assassination. So what ends up happening is JFK has been president for about 2+ years and really started making some waves. He was a president who wanted to change some of the ways the government was behaving and acting, and really had some progressive ideas, and particularly in relation to race. JFK was an advocate to some extent of the civil rights movement, and had early meetings with Martin Luther King and other leaders of the movement, and really wanted to push for further integration in society between blacks and whites. And so he goes to Texas in 1963. Basically, he had made some Texans really mad by some of his civil rights legislation and support. And at that time, Democrats were really divided. Southern Democrats were, to some extent, a racist group. They backed segregation and some of the older ways of Jim Crow laws. And Northern Democrats represented kind of a progressive part of the party, that they wanted to change the way that the country worked. And so he goes down to Texas to try to smooth over some of the relations. He was concerned about losing some of his popularity that he had that we discussed in the last video when he got inaugurated. So he was really concerned that he might lose some of his support. So let's get on here in the presentation. So Kennedy's popularity begins to fall. He goes to Texas, try to mend some fences, and there it starts. There's them getting off of Air Force One, and they decide they're going to do a little bit of a parade sort of thing, and so they head off in the streets of Dallas. The president wants to greet the people, try a little bit of a PR campaign, and so he sits next to the governor of Texas, right here. The governor of Texas, John Corley, sits in front, and his wife is next to him, and then there's the the Secret Service agents in front, and then Mrs. Kennedy in the back. And so you are probably familiar with at least some of the events that transpire, but I'll walk you through step by step. The motorcade comes here, and in A, this is the alleged sniper's nest where the rifle and the cartridge were found after the assassination. Here, B, this is an area of interest that we'll talk a little bit more about in class tomorrow. This is the wooden fence and the grassy knoll. You probably heard of that phrase before, where a puff of smoke was seen to emanate. So this is conspiracy theorists and people who have alternative views than the government provided would claim that there was a second shooter here. And C, the position of the governor in reaction to a shot. So like I said, we'll get in a little bit more detail, but his head moved in what people would assume to be the direction of a first shot. And then D, Kennedy's car was positioned right in a position where it was a straight shot from the Texas Schoolhouse Book Depository to his car. So this was seen as a bit of a silly way to move in hindsight, going down this kind of street, Elm Street, rather than going straight down, continuing on Main Street. So a little bit more detail. Now, like I said, this is the route that they used, going down here, and the sniper's nest, various other big buildings that people, some conspiracy theorists, assume that there are other people involved and that they might be in these buildings. And we're going to watch some film tomorrow. It might be a little yucky, so if you've got a weak stomach, you might want to turn your head at certain times. But a guy named Zapruder was taking footage of this, so it was a cool thing to have the president visit your town, so he was pretty excited. So he has what's probably seen as the best video evidence of the assassination. So there's that grassy knoll area. So kind of an overhead view. And one last time, just to make sure we all kind of understand at least the geography and the layout. So this is what the government would claim happened right here. Oswald, who we'll talk about in just a moment, fires some shots and kills the president. And so this is seen as really tragic. So let's move on to some of the details. So Kennedy was shot in the head and dies almost instantaneously. The car races to the hospital where they try to revive him, but if you are missing your brain, you are going to die. And so Kennedy dies. There is the First Lady who tried to jump out of the car and grab part of her husband's remains, which is pretty tragic. She was very frightened and got a little upset, obviously, when this all went down. And towards the end of that day, the police have found what they believe to be the shooter, and they still claim that today. Lee Harvey Oswald is seen as the guy who fired the shots, and the Warren Commission, which was a group set up to figure out how did this happen and how it all went down, concluded that he was the lone shooter. This is still the government's position today. However, a lot of people have various ideas about alternatives to that he shot the president and he was acting on his own, that he was angry against the president and didn't like some of his policies. And then Lee Harvey Oswald, while in jail, is going to get transferred to a second jail. They thought the city jail wasn't safe enough, so they wanted to transfer him to a separate facility. And on his way out, this guy, Jack Ruby, decides to shoot Lee Harvey Oswald. A lot of people would say this is an indication that something deeper lied kind of in the situation with the assassination, because why would you kill the killer immediately unless you were trying to cover up something? But nevertheless, Lee Harvey Oswald dies because of his gunshot wounds, and Jack Ruby is arrested. So a little bit more detail tomorrow about Jack Ruby's kind of history and background. And so the Warren Commission states that Kennedy was killed by 3 shots from this depository that we saw on the map. It wasn't until the appearance of this Zapruder film later that gives a more graphic account of the murder, like I said, but also enables sound analysis. So previously, people just had eyewitness accounts and silent movie footage, but the Zapruder film had some audio attached to it as well. So there's some assumptions that people had questions about this Warren Commission, the government's description of what happened that day, and prior and after. So we'll see what you guys think, what conspiracy theories maybe you buy into, or if you like the idea of the government's description of the events. And the U.S. government, like I said, the assassination was planned and carried out by one man who was acting alone. And we're going to look here at the magic bullet, one of the descriptions in the Warren Commission about how this all happened. And so one of the bullets has a very interesting life, I guess, and that is the bullet was fired from this book depository, hits JFK's shoulder, goes through his neck, and then the guy in front of him, the governor of Texas, also gets shot through the back, hits his wrist, and then lodges in his leg. Now, if you know anything about physics, this seems like a pretty strange description of a transfer of a bullet. And we'll look, like I said, a little more detail tomorrow in class. But nevertheless, this is what they claimed happened, that this bullet went through 2 people in a pretty irregular path. And so who killed JFK? I will address, at least in a general description, some of the more prevalent conspiracy theories out there. So one would be this idea of 3 tramps. Tramps was kind of a weird term at the time for people who traveled on trains without paying, so kind of like hobos. And 3 guys are arrested shortly after the assassination. And some people think that they shot from the grassy knoll, ran to these trains, got arrested, but a lot of the evidence surrounding these guys was never found or was disposed of, so there's not a whole lot of information about who these people were. Some witnesses later on claim that they knew who these guys were, at least one of them. The second option is the CIA. Some people accuse the CIA of murdering the president, which would be a pretty high and treasonous action, but nevertheless, JFK and the CIA did not always see eye to eye. They disagreed about some of his policy decisions and actions surrounding the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis, and saw him as a weak military leader, that he might even try to settle and create peace between the Soviet Union and the United States, and that people in the CIA were very much against this. During the Eisenhower administration, the CIA had a lot of freedom to do what they did, and JFK was seen as kind of ringing in or bringing some control on the CIA that they previously didn't have. The third idea is that Cuban exiles, Cuba fell to communists, and not everyone was very thrilled about JFK's actions, that he botched this, and so some people assume that Cuban exiles, angry against the president for failing to free Cuba from communist rule, plot and are part of his assassination. Cordmeyer is one, I'll talk in class because that one's a little bit more complicated. The mob, JFK did have some connections with the mob in his political dealings with his campaign, and had made some mobsters mad because his brother, Bobby Kennedy, was now prosecuting the mob in a manner that was significantly different than in past administrations. In fact, there was no branch of the FBI that was in charge of trying to track down and try mobsters. It just didn't really exist. So as the president and his brother, the attorney general, really tried to put pressure and put mobsters behind bars, they're seen as being maybe not so sad, or maybe even a part of JFK's assassination. Johnson, the vice president, was seen as another conspiracy theory, that he was a very aggressive man, that he had a lot of ambition and didn't really like being vice president, that he disagreed with some of JFK's policies and decisions, that he thought that he might not even get put on the re-election ticket, that he might lose his vice presidency job, and so he had some motivation to get rid of JFK, as well as the vice presidency. The role is pretty limited as far as the power and the abilities that the vice president has in the Constitution, and JFK really didn't do much to give Johnson much to do, really, other than ceremonial sort of actions. And so some people would claim that he was cutthroat and wanted the job, and so is a part of a plan to eliminate the president. And last is that there's a decoy casket, and this is not that the president didn't die. It's pretty obvious that he was shot and killed, but some people would say that in the transportation of his body from Texas to Washington, D.C., where the autopsy was performed, that they changed the body, and that they took JFK's body and damaged it further to make the evidence appear that he was assassinated in one way, when in fact the evidence might be contrary. So that is one kind of alternative theory, that they altered his physical appearance to make it look like he was assassinated in a different way than he had been. So that's our assassination video. If you watch this, kudos to you for getting some extra info. We'll watch some more tomorrow and get some information about how this all went down and what would be some plausible explanations. All right, thanks. Bye.